Welcome to The Detail. I am your host, Cathy Antunes, and you are listening to The Detail on WSLR 96.5 LPFM in Sarasota, Florida, and WBPV 100.1 LPFM in Bradenton, Florida. Today I've got a two-part show for you all. Betsy Young, who is running for state attorney, is going to be joining us to talk about her candidacy in the first half hour. Betsy is challenging the incumbent, Ed Brodsky, who we did invite, but he declined. He feels he's got enough forums that he's doing. So unfortunately, Mr. Brodsky, our current state attorney, declined to join us, but we have Betsy Young. Betsy, thank you so much for being with us. And I know Betsy's there. We also, there you go. We also have Tim Fanning in our virtual green room.
They've been quiet all morning.
And now the dogs are making noise.
Now they're making noise. So yeah. I don't know.
That's okay.
I'm sorry.
Tim Fanning is in our virtual green room, and Tim Fanning is going to be joining us at 9:30 to talk about his article in today's Sarasota Herald Tribune print edition about his investigation into County Commissioner Mike Morant's finances. So first, talking about the state attorney's race, Betsy Young, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely.
I always kick off candidate interviews and forums with, tell us about yourself. For somebody who doesn't know you, you're running for state attorney in Manatee, Sarasota, and DeSoto County.
Correct.
And so it's actually a huge geography, a large population. It's more than running for Congress, actually. You're covering more ground, more of a population. So a lot of those folks, maybe they don't know you. Tell us about yourself and why you're running, Betsy.
Okay. So I'll start with the boring stuff. I've been a lawyer for 21 years. I was law school at Florida State University, and I started in the state attorney's office in the Second Judicial Circuit, which is Leon County in Tallahassee. And I was there for about 3 years. And then after that, we moved back toward home. I was born and raised in St. Petersburg, and Manatee, Sarasota counties is close enough to home, but not right on top of all my family. My husband's family was born and raised in Venice, and all of his family is in Venice still. I was at the state attorney's office here in Sarasota for approximately 5 years, from 2002 to October of 2007. When I left, I primarily did criminal defense work. I've done some other civil matters and family law and those kinds of things, but primarily I've been involved in the criminal justice system. And since Mr. Brodsky took office, there's been quite a change in the way cases are handled, in the way that office is being led. So about 3 or so years ago, I decided it was time for a change and that somebody else needed to run the state attorney's office. And I actually started looking around trying to recruit somebody else to run for state attorney. And I talked to a few people. Some people talked to my husband, who's also an attorney and is a Republican. And when we really got down to brass tacks, I'm very passionate about the criminal justice system. I'm passionate about making sure victims are taken care of. I'm passionate about making sure that cases are handled properly. And so I decided to run, and that was about 2.5, 3 years ago. And since then, I've just been trying to raise awareness for the injustice that I was seeing on a daily basis. And I think that some of that has come to light with some high-profile cases. But really on a granular level, with just basic people who are not high-profile cases are being mishandled and things are going wrong. And so that's why I'm running.
Okay. So, all right. So let's start there. I mean, you did spend 5 years or 6 years in this state attorney office, right?
In Sarasota, I think I started in February or March of 2002, and then I left in October of 2007.
Okay. And at that time, who was the state attorney?
Earl Moreland was the state attorney at that time.
Okay. So you were used to seeing how the state attorney's office ran, and did you feel that it was run properly or well when you were there?
I believe so. I think that there was a real attention to justice and doing the right thing in cases. Sometimes that means sending someone to prison for a very long time, and sometimes that means dropping a case because you don't have evidence. But I think that in my experience, at that state attorney's office with Mr. Moreland and Dennis Nolles, who was the second in command at the time, I felt like we were doing the right thing. We were wearing the right hats. We were ethical and professional. And a lot of the people that I work with, that I was in at the state attorney's office, are now judges. And I think that shows the level of impartiality and attention to ethics and professionalism that those attorneys had at that time.
Okay. So, and Mr. Moreland was a Republican, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. And he had been there, because typically state attorneys are there for a while.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So he retired, I guess. Mr. Brodsky's been in there now for almost 8 years.
Correct.
Okay. So you left in 2007. I guess that means Mr. Brodsky came in around 2010. No, 2012, excuse me. Mm-hmm. So, I understand the legal community. It's not like there are all that many of you all, actually. So what did you witness? What did your colleagues witness that has you concerned that you actually decided to run?
So there were a few things. I was seeing a discrepancy and a disparity in the way defendants sentencing. When I was a defense attorney, obviously that's something that impacted my clients. I was also seeing that victims in cases were not being kept informed about what was going on in their cases. People were in court. It was chaotic. Folks didn't know what was going on. There's lack of communication. It was very difficult to get an answer out of Mr. Brodsky. You had to go through so many levels of bureaucracy before you could talk to him, if you were permitted to speak with him at all. Mm-hmm. So it was, it's hard to point to one thing, but in general, it was just a decline in the quality of prosecutions and the leadership. It's a leadership issue and a climate issue that really impacted, I think, the way cases were being handled. And the other thing is a turnover. The state attorney, when I was there, you spent a lot of time in misdemeanors because there were not spots that were opening up. People were there for years and years. And I couldn't keep track of the names of misdemeanor attorneys because they came and went so frequently and so quickly.
Because the retention rate was high. There were a lot of people there with many years of service, is what you're saying. Yeah. And
right. There was a lot of turnover. And when you look at the turnover at the state attorney's race, at the state attorney's office in the 12th Judicial Circuit versus the public defender's office, it's very stark.
Okay, because it's been reported by the Herald Tribune that 98 people have left the state attorney's office between the years 2012, when Mr. Brodsky came on board, and 2019. Versus 49 people at the public defender's office. I mean, that's a double. That's 100% more people leaving. And one of the issues cited has been micromanagement. Is that accurate to say?
I think so.
Okay. All right. What about pay inequity? Because now this I thought was kind of interesting in your debate with Mr. Brodsky at Tiger Bay. He used the term gender baiting, which I had never heard of before, as a way of downplaying pay inequity issue, and that men versus women that you had brought up, that women are making $36,000 a year less. The chief assistants,
correct,
are making that much less than the men, and the men are making six figures, all of them. Can you just explain more about that? Sure. And was that an issue with Mr. Moreland? I mean, I don't know if that came up, but what's been the history of pay between men and women, hiring of men and women, and just if you could fully
Sure. I think the hiring and promoting of men and women is not an issue for me. And I think that again speaks to the level of professionalism and the quality of people. So the assistant state attorneys, I think, by and large, do a fantastic job at that office, given the conditions that they have to work in under Mr. Brodsky. Mm-hmm. The problem that I have is that I pay taxes, you pay taxes.
Mhm.
We are funding the state attorney's office. And there's a statute that requires state attorneys to pay people equitably, regardless of race or gender. And the statute is very clear that it should be based on your level of experience and your job responsibilities.
Mhm.
And when you have two chief assistants, the woman who has been there for 2 years longer than the man, and she's making $36,000 a year less, I don't know how in the hell you can justify that. If it was a couple $1,000s and it was, based on, some bonus of some sort, but $36,000 is
that's
a lot of money. It's more than a lot of people make a year.
Yeah,
and we are funding that, and that is not okay. And it's not just those two people. There are 10 division chiefs. Every single one of the men, there are 5 men and 5 women. Every single man is making over $100,000 a year. Every single woman is making less than $100,000 a year. When you look at that, that is a pattern. And I think that if you are concerned at all about your liability, if you look at the Lilly Ledbetter, not the case, but the statute that followed, that's a problem. Yeah. And if those supervisors can track that back, this isn't going to impact their level of retirement, their pension, how much money they're going to get when they retire, because it's based on your salary and your years of service. But these women are being shortchanged, and it's not fair. And I don't care how much explaining you want to try to do and say, they said it's okay and we're in compliance. It's not fair. And you should look at yourself and say, why am I paying my women so much less than the men? Significantly less.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure a lot of women listening can relate to that and, understand why that would certainly motivate a female attorney to run, such as yourself. So tell me about the racial disparities in sentencing that you're concerned about. And particularly, there was a case of Mr. Flanzer, 27 years old. Can you tell us what he did, or what that case was about, and then what ensued?
So Ryan Flanzer was a 27-year-old man at the time who was in a civil lawsuit with someone and had some other legal troubles going on, civil legal troubles, and decided that he was going to take care of, in his own way, he was going to be a vigilante and take care of his legal problems with violence. So he armed himself with a high-powered rifle and talked his way into a condominium complex in Sarasota, in the city of Sarasota. He was wearing a flak jacket. He was armed to the teeth, and he shot this gun into an apartment. And thank God nobody was home and nobody was hurt. He then fled to a hotel, and he was in a standoff with law enforcement, with the Sarasota Police Department, for several hours.
And this all happened downtown Sarasota?
Correct. And he when the law enforcement finally got into his room, he had a trafficking amount of drugs in there. He had some Columbine shooter propaganda in his room. He had a list with the names of some very prominent attorneys in town, the Longboat Key chief of police on this list. The state attorney's office called that a hit list. They were other people that he had disputes with. And he did not spend any time in jail. He did not spend any time in prison, despite the fact that the charges he initially faced have a mandatory minimum sentence under the 1020 life law. The state attorney's office, Mr. Brodsky, reduced the charges so that he would not have to go to prison. He was allowed to attend a treatment program, and I'm going to put that in air quotes, in Malibu. So he was allowed to go to California instead of jail. And he was not a convicted felon. So as soon as he's off probation in a couple of years, he can own guns again. And the people who were on the hit list initially were contacted by Mr. Brodsky's office and kept in the loop. And then when he decided to do this sweetheart deal right around Christmas time, when nobody would be paying attention, he stopped communicating with the folks on the hit list. The campaign, Mr. Brodsky's reelection campaign, received $1,000 from Mr. Flanzer's fourth attorney. It's interesting to me that the first three attorneys were not able to get this deal for Mr. Flanzer, but the fourth attorney, who was a college friend apparently of Mr. Brodsky, so they're very close, and give him $1,000, and suddenly you have the deal of the century. So I do take issue with that. I think it's unfair that happened. I think it's unfair to the people who are on the hit list that they weren't contacted or consulted. It's a violation of Marcy's Law. I also think that it's unfair and unfortunate that Mr. Brodsky says, well, he had a mental health issue, to try to frame this as a mental health situation where somebody got treatment and was given a deal or a break because they have a mental health issue.
So let me jump in there, because I think most people, there is, as a society, we're looking at balancing, justice and mercy, and mental health versus, a true evil intent, that there is a role, right, for mental health treatment.
Absolutely.
And so, I look at the details of this case and have some thoughts, but I'm curious to know what your thoughts are about, as if you were elected, how would you balance that? I mean, sometimes it would be appropriate, right, to get mental health treatment. So where is mental health treatment appropriate? And then the withholding of adjudication here, that this man will have no record and that he can own firearms. It
Correct.
seems if he's at higher risk for, using them, which he's already demonstrated in a threatening way. What are your thoughts? Because that is what Mr. Brodsky basically said in his response to this objection that you brought up.
So two things. One is that the psych evaluations or the mental health evaluations are private. So those are not things that the public can see. So we can't fact check Mr. Brodsky on that. I have on some authority that the people who did the evaluations are not the typical people that you see in the courtroom. We have forensic psychologists who frequent the courtroom and do a lot of the evaluations for people that, that they have a relationship with the court and a relationship with the state attorney's office. These were not those mental health professionals. But when you're talking about mental health issues, most people, a lot of people who are on drugs have mental health issues. A lot of people who commit crimes have mental health issues. But what you have to look at is, how is that manifesting itself? If they're competent to proceed, if they understand right from wrong, and they are in possession of cocaine, that is one thing. If they understand right from wrong, if they're competent to proceed, and they're shooting up jam-packed condominiums, they should go to prison. That is not, should not be an excuse for violent behavior, and we should not accept that as an excuse for violent behavior. There's a time and a place for mental health treatment, certainly. Nonviolent offenders, people who are not a threat to our public safety. But in this instance, unless he was incompetent to proceed, and then that's a completely different ball of wax that you get into. Yeah.
So I wanted to bring it into claims about crime statistics, what's going on, because, the incumbent is saying that there's been a 50% reduction in crime. And I like numbers, I like numbers because they tend to bring the conversation to a level where everybody's, they're a good starting point, right? And Mr. Brodsky claimed that he's been aggressively going after child predators and homicides, and we've seen a 50% reduction in crime during his tenure. But you have brought forward that it's been difficult to track what he's talking about because you didn't have access to these statistics, and that they changed from one forum to another.
Sure.
What do you have to say about that now? I think before the show you said you actually do have some data now.
I do. So I think that Mr. Brodsky first of all, I don't know what the state attorney's office has to do with a reduction in the crime rate. That's a law enforcement function. You know, if somebody's breaking into your house, you don't call the state attorney's office. You call law enforcement. And that's something that the sheriffs and the chiefs of police have worked on. So that's the first thing. He doesn't talk about his conviction rate, which is something that his office has control over, is whether when people are charged with crimes, are they then, you know, held to account and are they convicted?
And what, do you happen to know what that is?
His conviction rate is lower. It's lower than the national average, and I don't have that statistic in front of me.
Okay.
But again, you know, a lot of things are included in that. Like if people enter pleas to lesser charges, so those statistics are really hard to get a handle on. The FDLE does have statistics for Sarasota and Manatee and DeSoto counties, and I've looked at those, and I don't see anywhere where there's a reduction of crime across the circuit by 50%. In fact, if you look at the case counts, how many cases that office handles, in 2012, 2013, it was 44,870 cases. So almost 45,000 cases. In 2019, 2020, it's 38,189 cases. So there's not a 50% reduction in the number of cases that the state attorney's office is handling. So the statistic that he's using, again, I would love for his chart to come out. I would love for his statistics to say, I'm looking at this FDLE website. You know, when I listened to a forum with Mr. Shaw and Mr. Batty the other day in Sarasota, they were talking about the crime rate in the city being down 20%. And again, that's largely because they're no longer arresting people for marijuana. When you remove a class of crimes and you're not arresting folks for having pot,
that's a big chunk. Right?
That's a lot
of 20% probably. So, okay, statistics again. You've been criticized for having claims on your campaign literature, making claims that you have led or litigated 150 cases, that you have been in trial on 150 times, when in fact that's not the case. It's more like 40 or in the high 30s. So I just want to give you the opportunity to respond to that. I mean, it was in the newspaper. You know, how did that happen? And what is the right number?
So I actually don't know the right number. And when I spoke with Mr. Williams, he refused to allow me to see what documentation he had.
So this is the person,
Lee Williams, who wrote the article.
Williams with the Herald Tribune wrote this article, right?
Right.
Okay. So he didn't share the documentation with you?
Correct. I said, I don't know what you're looking at, because he said it was Leon County and Sarasota County. And I've done trials in Jefferson County when I was in the Second Circuit. I've done trials in Manatee County. So I don't know. You know, my last name was different when I was in Leon County, you know, when I was up there. So I don't know. And it's not campaign literature. It was one press release over a year ago, in fact. So why this became an issue in October, I can only imagine. Clearly, it's a hit piece, and I admitted to being careless, but so has Mr. Brodsky. He's not being truthful about the crime statistics, and to me, this really is a non-issue. Mr. Brodsky made a claim at a Tiger Bay forum that he was the lead attorney in 100 trials. I don't know that Mr. Williams took any effort to fact check that. But he's the current state attorney, Mr. Brodsky is, and it concerns me that he had a double homicide reversed for prosecutorial misconduct, that one of his chief assistants had a child sex crime case reversed because of an inappropriate closing argument, and she was admonished by the bar for her misconduct. And last week, one of his prosecutors filed an information claiming that the victim was, quote, to be determined. So they filed an information that's supposed to be based on sworn testimony with a victim that they don't even know who it is. Wow. So this is misconduct. Well, my issue was careless. And there's nothing I can do to change the press release that went out. We did change it on the website the same day when I noticed the issue. We did not release a correction, and probably should have. And in retrospect, I would have released a correction to the newspaper. It is what it is. It was 13 months ago. It's not a big deal in my mind, and I'm sure that it's going to become one to Mr. Brodsky. But quite frankly, if this is all he's got, to argue that I shouldn't be state attorney because of a careless press release, then that's not a good enough reason to keep him in office for a third term.
So we just have 2 minutes left.
Okay.
Thank you for coming on. And
Sure.
just my listeners, we did ask Ed Brodsky to join us in this forum, and he declined. Betsy Young is the challenger candidate for the state attorney's office. Betsy, how do people get in touch with your campaign or you to find out more about you, to volunteer, whatever they want to do?
So my website is at Betsy Young, which is my name, and it's .vote. So it's a .vote. .com and .org were taken.
Okay.
But BetsyYoung.vote. There are, you can email through that. And my cell phone number is actually on the website. So if you have questions about the state attorney's office, certainly give me a call, and I'd be happy to discuss any issues that folks have.
Okay. And so just to sum it up, I mean, if you're elected, I guess to sum it up, why should people vote for you?
I'm going to bring an independent voice and independent leadership to the state attorney's office. When we were talking about that Flanzer case, and I mentioned the $1,000 contribution that Mr. Brodsky received from the defense attorney, I neglected to mention that in his campaign, he's received over $80,000 from 4 folks. And they are the 4 developers that we see funding other campaigns. Over $80,000 from 4 people. And if he's willing to sell out a case for $1,000 contribution to a friend of his, I'm concerned about what that means, what $80,000 into his campaign coffers will mean for our community. I'm going to be an independent voice. I have broad support. I have crossover support. So I urge people to vote early and vote for Betsy Young for state attorney.
Okay, Betsy Young, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We
I appreciate it.
All right, have a great day. So, and I always like to remind people, we always ask both candidates to come on, but I don't cancel forums because somebody refuses to come on. I think it's important when a candidate is willing, we have them on. So if Ed Brodsky changes his mind and would like the equal time, we'll always give it to him. You're listening to The Detail on WSLR 96.5 LPFM in Sarasota, Florida, and WBPV 100.1 LPFM in Bradenton, Florida. Voting by mail is under Florida law. All registered voters are permitted to vote by mail. Voters are encouraged to consider this option for the November general election, as the situation with COVID-19 may make people hesitant to go to the polls in person. You may request a vote by mail ballot in person, by mail, email, fax, or by phone. Only the voter or a designated member of his or her immediate family or legal guardian can request a vote by mail ballot for the voter. To request a vote by mail ballot in Sarasota County, you can go to sarasotavotes.com or call 941-861-6000. And the deadline to request a vote by mail ballot is October 24th, so you've got 9 days to do that. And you can send it in via mail or drop it off in person. So now I'd like to welcome Tim Fanning to the show. Tim is a writer with the Sarasota Herald Tribune. That's got a pretty huge story. It's huge by local standards in terms of its investigative value. Tim, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me back, Cathy.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have done a story looking at County Commissioner Mike Moran's finances, specifically his participation in the PACE loan program. So can you first just tell us, maybe we should spend a little bit of time talking about PACE loans, and then we could talk about, so people understand. And I've written, if you go to my blog, thedetail.net, there's an article I've written called The Greenwashing of Predatory Lending. I have an opinion about PACE loans, but it stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy. So Tim, can you explain to everyone what a PACE loan is?
Sure. So it's really a tool to allow property owners to finance energy saving updates to their homes, storm hardening updates to their homes. And instead of taking a traditional loan out from a bank or taking
Mhm.
a mortgage out, you essentially put a lien on your home. Um,
Mhm.
and so this has been around for a little while now. In 2008, started in California. It made its way over to Sarasota in 2011. But in its time in Florida, it's gotten a number of consumer advocates concerned because what they're finding is that many low income and elderly residents don't realize that this is going to be a significant increase to their tax bills. Many of them weren't told that this
Yeah.
happened. And so Sarasota County was actually one of the last counties in Florida to adopt this program. And essentially, what it does is it allows these private lenders and contractors and their administrators to operate within Sarasota County. So in 2017, Michael Moran
Well,
commissioned.
hang on. I do want to clarify something. So, just so people understand, so it's a loan from a bank, but unlike and in Florida, we have really strong protections against people losing their homes. Like you can go bankrupt in Florida, but your creditors can't take your home. And a lot of people choose to locate here for that reason. That some of the financial protections, but that's one of them. So what's different about a PACE loan is it is actually collected by the tax collector in your county. You're not paying the bank. You are paying your county tax collector, and then the tax collector is sending the money to the bank. And it has the same weight as taxes. In other words, it is takes priority over your mortgage when it comes to who's first in line to be paid. And what that can do is cause you, because a lot of people, as you linked in your article, Tim, evidence of people who are sold these loans aren't really aware of the true interest rate, aren't really aware that they're going to be paying a lot more actually when the day is over for their new air conditioning or new windows, because the interest rates, you have to include upfront costs and um, closing costs. So the interest rates are quite high compared to a home equity loan.
Mhm.
And if you default on it, you can lose your house, because if you can't pay your property tax bill, somebody else, the bank can come in and pay it for you and seize your house. You can get in real financial trouble. But most of the time, these loans are sold by someone with a tablet who makes it sound like it's the easiest thing since sliced bread. They don't qualify the borrower, and you just sign a tablet, and later on you can find out that you're in really deep trouble and can lose your house. And this has happened in our area. Certainly, Tampa Bay Times has reported this happening. So uh, many consumer advocates see it as concerning. These loans are bundled and sold as securities to Wall Street. So there's a real, as I see it, there's a real conflict in terms of using the tax collector to collect for a private bank. We've
Sure.
never done that in this country. They're unprecedented loans. So now tell us about, now tell us about what got you interested in looking into Mike Moran's finances?
Well,
And
every June or so, if you're a public official, you are required to file a financial disclosure form, which indicates essentially how you make your money, who you owe money to, among a few other things. And uh, we noticed that he had some new money coming in, and we essentially tracked where that money came from. And it turns out that he was offered a $150,000 contract to work with a PACE funding agency called Florida PACE Funding Agency. They're they're an interlocal agreement between Flagler County and the city of Kissimmee. And looking even deeper, we found that he was actually recruited for the position after he voted in the majority to allow PACE programs to operate within Sarasota County in 2017, and a subsequent vote a year after to allow Florida PACE Funding Agency, for which he is now the executive director, to operate in Sarasota County. Now, he says that there is no conflict of interest here. He says that if this were to ever come up, um, he would recuse himself. And I mean, he's right, it hasn't come up before the board, but several government watchdogs and consumer advocates have said this is a pretty troublesome relationship that he has.
Yeah. Now you talked with Fasano, Mike Fasano, is that his name, from Pasco County, who is the tax collector there?
Yes.
Okay. He's one of the people that you quote as being concerned. What were your conversations like with him?
Well, we talked about his work as a consumer advocate. He's one of the he's one of several who are concerned about these PACE loans, and so we talked about Moran's relationship with uh, Florida PACE and how the operation works, and he was particularly troubled because in his mind, you can't be a county commissioner and the head of an organization that administers these funds.
Your article actually talks about, isn't there something in the state constitution which specifically prohibits public officials from taking on employment which conflicts with their official role as in
Correct. Yeah, that's what it
public
says in
role?
the charter. Now, I tried to get the county's legal team to weigh in. They declined. We're still trying to reach some law professors over at Stetson and others to see what exactly constitutes as a conflict of interest and if this fits in with that. But it is
Mhm.
interesting that the county's charter does spell that out.
Okay. Um, yeah, and I'd like to have you on to talk about the changes that are being contemplated by the charter, review board, but that's another show, because our county charter is our local constitution. It's an important document. Um, you also talked to Ben Wilcox from
Mhm.
Integrity Florida and Alice Vickers, who headed up the Florida Consumer Protection Agency. And what did those folks have to say to you about, having a county commissioner heading up the PACE loan program?
Sure. So Ben Wilcox talked about it. Just he seemed to think it's odd that you have this sequence of events where it would appear that he was rewarded for his positive vote in favor of Florida PACE, but there's no way to prove that right now. We would have to
Mhm.
show that there was a quid pro quo, and there's no evidence of that.
Okay. And Alice Vickers, I know I had her on my radio show back in 2017 to talk about these loans. I believe it was her, it was the head of the Consumer Protection Agency. Um, what is her take on it all?
Yeah, she also sees it as a conflict of interest. We even talked a little bit about Moran's role in arguing against certain consumer protection mechanisms, and she told me that many of those things are standard in Florida. They've been put in place because from lessons learned in places like Broward County and other places.
Yeah, what are they specifically? So these are protections that if you're going to operate and do PACE loans, then you have to meet certain standards. And Mike Moran argued against these standards. What were the standards? Do you recall what they were that he argued
So
against?
I believe one of them had to do with communicating with your mortgage holder ahead of um, putting forth the loan.
Mhm.
It wasn't really that stringent. It was something to do with like you just have to tell them that you're doing this ahead of this, not that you have to get their approval.
Well, that would prevent just signing a tablet because some air conditioning guy said this was a good idea. I mean, that has happened in Florida. But if you had to go to your mortgage company, you couldn't just make an impulsive decision. It puts
Right.
the brakes on that.
I believe he also argued against a gross income percentage. which basically my interpretation is that it would essentially show that you're making money here in Florida and that you can afford
that you
it.
can pay. So it's some way to qualify the borrower and
Correct.
protect people from taking on too much debt and losing their house. And, the other thing is the mortgage company, it makes sense that they would have to take it a step further and have the mortgage company agree to take a back seat in the line of priority of getting paid. I don't know that many mortgage companies would do that, except if they're also doing PACE loan lending, they might. I think that's why some of these lenders have their hands in so many different pies. But despite Mr. Moran arguing against these protections, do we have them in Sarasota County?
We do. Yeah, they stayed in place. It was a
Okay.
comment that he made in one of the hearings ahead of the public hearing that would pass the ordinance. And now that public
Mhm.
hearing saw comments from people like yourself and
Yeah.
CPAs who kind of talked about this idea that this program would lead to predatory lending. Now,
Mhm.
I spoke to the county's staffers that operate this program, and they said that they have had no complaints from any of the 4 providers who operate in Sarasota County. But Mike,
Well,
the
I gotta stop. Any
Sure.
of the 4 providers? You mean the lenders?
Lenders, I'm sorry.
It's so to me, that's so illuminating. Shouldn't they be concerned about complaints from the borrowers? Isn't that who they work for, not the lender? See,
Right,
that's the thing that flips it. You've got the government working for the banks,
right.
and you're telling me that the county said they didn't get complaints from the lenders.
Well,
I
sorry, I misspoke. They
Okay,
had
good.
gotten complaints about the program from
From
their
borrowers.
yes.
Okay.
So what is curious though, in what we will be looking at in the future is, so Mike Fasano said that it's incredibly difficult to regulate. No government organization regulates these PACE loan.
I mean, they're unprecedented sort of loan. Yeah.
Right. So, and that can also make finding complaints particularly tricky. Like, for example, in the Tampa Bay Times investigation that you referenced, they built a database based on complaint or based on these loans, and I believe they actually called a lot of these folks, which is exactly
You
what
would have to, yeah.
it's the only way you can really determine whether somebody is being taken advantage of is if you do the work yourself and try to figure it out. So
Mhm.
something that we'll be looking at here in the future.
Yeah, because, I gave public input in 2017 to the county commission, very concerned about these loans. The thing is, w financially savvy people, uh, when you're calculating interest, because back in 2017, they were saying, these loans were at about 5 to 7%. And, money markets right now are at a 0.5%. So if, and home equity loans are at about 3, mortgages around 3. So, if your credit is good, you can do a lot better than this loan, right? 5 to 7%. But the thing is, you have to add in the closing costs. You have to add in all the upfront costs, um, that they're charging you. And when I did that, and I wrote about this on my blog, so you can find the article there, the actual interest rate was 11.5% plus, because a lot of that was upfront, the payment, and it wasn't amortized over 20 years, which these loans are typically amortized over 20 years. Really, the rate is even higher than 11.5%. So financially savvy people don't take out a loan like that ever. I mean, that is like 3, 4, 5 times the market. And I ticked off some of my environmental activist friends who were promoting these loans. I said, do you really understand what you're telling people to do here? They'd be much better off just going to the bank and getting a home equity loan. And if they get turned down by the bank for a home equity loan, you know, it's almost entirely certain they should not be taking out one of these high risk loans. And in a time like we're in now with COVID, everything is fine until it isn't. people who were working who now find themselves without employment. And if they have one of these loans, they can really be in trouble. So I'm curious. I want to go back to Mr. Moran being recruited for the position, being the executive director of Florida PACE Funding Agency. Do you know who recruited him for that position?
That's where it gets a little hazy, but I know that Mike Moran and Jim Lay, Sarasota County's former county administrator,
Mhm.
were working together on this program. They were in contact with another guy called CJ DeSantis, who I believe also worked with the county in lobbying for a time. But I'm not sure exactly who recruited him for the position, but he was
Mm.
the only one to interview for the job in spring 2019. And meeting minutes show that um, Jim Lay seconded a motion to begin forming a contract with Mike Moran, and it got
So,
from there. Yeah,
nobody else interviewed for the job of executive director. Is that
not
right?
not what the public records show. Yeah.
So, I mean, equal employment opportunity, apparently they don't have to comply with that, whoever's founding this organization. You say Jim on the board of what? Jim Lay's on the board of
Yeah, so this PACE funding agency, like I said, is an interlocal agreement with governments over on the East Coast, and they kind of operate as a um, local government themselves. They're subject to public records, and they have a board. They have a 5-member board that operates, and so Mike Moran is the executive director of the governing board. He's kind of like a city manager or a county administrator.
and it's Flagler and Kissimmee, Flagler County and the city of Kissimmee.
Mhm.
Okay, and Jim Lay's on the board, and so Mike Moran has a staff of 1, right?
How
He's
was that?
got 1 employee. Okay, and her name is Wendy Leach. Tell us about Wendy's Leach role in campaign finance. So she is Mike Moran's employee with the Florida PACE Funding Agency, but she
Right.
also plays another role,
She
doesn't she?
does. She is the chair of Florida Country, which is a political action committee that has raised 175,000 over $175,000 this election cycle. Um, what we've seen here locally is that they're responsible for a number of mailers in favor of Moran, both in the primary election and during the general election. So she's the head of that agency. Mike Moran says that she's a really talented accountant and that she keeps both separate, or he keeps both entities separate. Now, it's important to note that Mike Moran doesn't oversee Florida Country. That's completely separate. It's a political action committee that is in favor of his campaign. But it is curious that she is playing this double role.
Mhm. Yeah, I find it difficult. It stretches credulity, I think, to claim that a person who is your employee can act independently, heading up a political committee to get you reelected. Um, you know, we're just seeing the boundaries pushed so far in Sarasota, and Florida Country. I've put it up on the screen before here, doing shows showing the money flow for Florida Country, and now it's up to 175 grand. Um, but their primary spending in the primary was for Mike Moran, and between Florida Country and his own campaign, for the primary, it was about $150,000. I don't think Wendy Leach. I just don't see how she can be. I don't know how you can be separate. I know, we all have supervisors at work. Um, can you really operate independently as a political chair of a committee when you work for the person that you're benefiting politically? I mean, that to me is it's just crazy. Um, have you ever seen this kind of relationship? I mean, I know that I've looked at dark money packs. I haven't seen that kind of relationship between the candidate and the chair, but maybe this is common. I don't know.
I
Have you
don't
seen
know.
that
I mean,
before?
the way I've seen Sarasota work, I mean, it's a very close-knit community. You see a lot of the same folks running in the same circles.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, there's other information. George Thurlow has raised questions about uh, Mike Moran's filings, his financial disclosures, and the fact that he has gotten private financing for mortgages. Is is your paper looking at that? Are you looking at that?
Yeah, I am looking at this. This is
Yeah.
it's tricky. Ron Ciravella is a prominent Republican donor and the head of Dolphin Aviation, which is, if you've been here long enough, you'll know that it's home to rallies. And I mean, Adam
Mhm.
Putnam was there in 2018.
I'm
But
sorry, you cut out. Who was there in 2018?
Adam Putnam, when he was running for governor
Okay.
there in 2018.
Mhm.
So,
I
but
think Vern Buchanan's had events at Dolphin Aviation. I mean, it's a pretty well-known venue.
sure.
Mhm.
But this is something we're looking into. Ciravella is known around town as what's called a hard lender. He lends to hundreds of folks. He's been doing it for years. He's also kind of laid back on his donations to Republicans in recent years. We checked to see if he's ever donated or any of his businesses have ever donated to Moran, and they haven't. Um,
Mhm.
but it is an interesting route. Moran is a real estate agent, and he has flipped a number of properties since he's been here in 2000, since 2002. But he's been he's largely done those through banks. So the question is, why did he go through this private lender?
Yeah. Yeah, because I know, the question that was put out there by Mr. Thurlow looking at the financial disclosures was the same amount of money was listed for a number of years in terms of the amount owed, which would suggest that no payments were made on a particular mortgage. And that would be I'd like to get a mortgage where I didn't have to make any payments for a few years. I mean, any thoughts about that? Have you seen those documents?
I have, yeah. So George Thurlow is a campaign manager of several campaigns, most notably Mark Piancos, who was running against Mike Moran. And
Okay.
he sent these documents out to several reporters, and I have seen the documents. He's right that in the most recent campaign filings, Moran has the um, cost of the loan listed several times. So at least in the public record, it looks like he didn't show that he was paying it down.
Yeah,
Um,
because the principal remained the same, right?
right. Uh,
Yeah.
but again, this is not something that we have reported fully out. We have yet to
No.
speak to Mike Moran himself to have him speak to what this is. But it's certainly an interesting story.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Tim, Fanning, this was, um, an eye opener. I mean, I don't think many people even knew about this agency, the Florida PACE Funding Agency. I have seen donations from Y Green, which is one of the lenders, PACE lenders, and actually spoke at that hearing with the 2017 hearing with one of the representatives from Y Green. But I know they donate to political committees. Um, but it's illuminating. I think I just congratulate you on the investigation and bringing all this up, and I know some people are just like, "Yay, we're finally," we feel like some of these issues haven't been closely looked at, by the Herald, and people are grateful that this kind of reporting is being done, and I understand this took a lot of your personal time, right? I mean, so I'm just gonna put a plug in for supporting the local newspaper. It's in today's issue. If you don't subscribe, grab a copy, that's in the print copy of today's paper, and we need local journalism. I mean, we need people like you who are working beyond what you're being paid, to hold our officials accountable and to share information. So, Tim, thank you.
Well, thank you so
Um,
much for having me on the show. I really appreciate this conversation. I've enjoyed it a lot.
yeah, Tim, and can you share a bit before we leave? I would like to hear, you're a young journalist. What's it like these days, being a young journalist? I mean, it's a time of great challenge,
Sure,
isn't
yeah,
it?
it's a lot of fun. It can be draining some weeks, but this is such an interesting town with such interesting politics. In fact, I've learned more about Sarasota this election cycle than I think in the entire time I've been at the Sarasota Herald Tribune. So yeah.
How long have you been there?
Well, I was an intern, and then I turned into a kind of a freelancer for a while, and
Mhm.
I've officially been in the government beat since November.
Okay. Well, Tim Fanning, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for the article. And please, come back and share your excellent reporting with us in the future. It's great to have you here.
Great to be here. Thank you, Kathy.
Okay, thank you. And everybody, I want to remind you that you, under Florida law, all registered voters are permitted to vote by mail. Voters are encouraged to consider this option for the November general election, as the situation with COVID-19 may make people hesitant to go to the polls in person. You may request a vote by mail ballot in person, by mail, email, fax, or by phone. Only the voter or a designated member of his or her immediate family or legal guardian can request a vote by mail ballot for the voter. To request a vote by mail ballot in Sarasota County, you can go to sarasotavotes.com or call 941-861-6000. That's 941-861-6000. And you have until October 24th to request a vote by mail ballot. A lot of people I know are hand delivering their mail-in ballots. You can do that. Just go to sarasotavotes.com to find the locations where the supervisor of elections is accepting your mail-in ballot. And should you get a mail-in ballot but decide you want to vote in person, you can just go to an early voting location or vote on the day of. My husband and I like to vote early. I believe that starts October 19th. And the supervisor of elections is open more locations. Thanks so much for listening, and stay tuned for my friend Carlos Pagan and Medtropics. Make it a great day.